I used to be obsessed with exploring the dark web purely out of curiosity. Working in tech, it felt almost like part of the job to understand the internet's hidden corners. I'd spend hours on conspiracy forums, browsing underground markets promising bizarre and illegal items, from alien artifacts to services you wouldn't believe exist. It was fascinating but also deeply unsettling, a world where anonymity drives people to unimaginable extremes. And then there were the darker marketplaces, places where you could buy narcotics, organs, and other unthinkable commodities. There were no rules here, no limits to the kind of danger you could stumble into. It was a world that existed solely on its own twisted terms, and once you entered it, it didn't let go easily. Looking back, I regret some of the things I bought there, items I had no business acquiring, and the things I saw that still haunt me. But there's one particular story from my time spent exploring that market that still sends chills down my spine and makes me question everything about the time I spent there. The dark web market I explored felt like a twisted Craigslist, offering illegal and bizarre items, but one listing chilled me: a seller offering souvenirs from tragic events tied to real-life disasters and crimes. I shut my browser in horror, vowing never to return. Weeks later, I received a cryptic message: "I know what you found. I'm watching you." It seemed like a prank until paranoia set in. The darkness I sought had followed me, and there was no escaping it. The problem with the dark web, as I soon realized, is that it becomes addictive. Once you start searching for things you shouldn't be looking for, you find yourself drawn further and further into its web. If you had enough bitcoins to spend, the site had just about everything: pirated movies that weren't released to the public, stolen government gadgets, and even secret recipes from major brands. But it didn't stop there. It also sold things like human organs, dead bodies, classified photos and videos from notorious crimes, and much more. Things I never thought I would see outside of a crime thriller movie. It was a world where you could buy anything, as long as you were willing to dive deep enough into the abyss. And once you're in, it feels like there's no way out. The more I delved into the dark web, the more I realized that it had no limits. Beyond the usual markets selling contraband and illegal substances, there were services and products that seemed so far outside the realm of sanity, they felt like something from a nightmare. Hitman for hire services, for example, were disturbingly common. People could pay for someone's life to be extinguished, or worse, arrange some kind of sick, twisted date with someone who was about to be annihilated. It was all so dark, so twisted, that you couldn't help but wonder how far people were willing to go when they thought they could do anything without consequence. But hey, who was I to judge? Everyone lives their life as they choose, and they have to face whatever consequences come with it. I just never thought I'd find myself getting sucked deeper into that world. One day I was idly browsing, probably looking for some random games or whatever struck my interest at the time. But then, something caught my attention. There was a new listing, and you know how it goes on the dark web, you're always curious about the latest editions. What's new? What's fresh? I clicked on it without a second thought, assuming it would be something strange but harmless. But as I read the description, my heart dropped. It was disturbing in ways I couldn't have imagined. It was offering access to children as young as 7, and the seller claimed to be able to provide forged documents. The description itself felt like a trap, but not the kind I was used to seeing. This felt different, darker, more sinister. My first thought was that it had to be a honeypot, some sort of sting operation meant to catch people like me. Maybe an undercover agent setting up a trap to lure in people willing to buy into something that would lead to their arrest. But I couldn't just walk away without seeing more. I was reckless, brash, probably a bit too bold for my own good. At that point, I was in my early 20s, and the thrill of finding something forbidden pulled me in like a moth to a flame. So, I decided to message the seller. I logged back into the marketplace, fingers trembling slightly as I started typing. My first message was simple, almost too straightforward: "How do we know you're not an undercover agent trying to trap people?" I half expected a vague response, or for them to just shut down. But instead, the reply was blunt. "Well, you don't know." That made me pause. It was exactly the kind of answer I'd expect from a honeypot, but my curiosity was already in full force. I couldn't leave it alone, I had to dig deeper. I responded, "If you're legit, prove it." I have Bitcoin ready. I thought this would be the moment where things would take a dark turn, but I never imagined how dark it would really get. The next message I received was one that froze me to my core. The seller asked me if I wanted a boy or a girl, and then followed it up with, "What age?" My mind screamed at me to stop, to close the chat and walk away. But the morbid curiosity combined with the adrenaline made me type something I'll never forget. I told him, "A boy, around 6 years old." The response came almost instantly: pictures. I was horrified as the images loaded. The boy in the photos appeared to be about that age. In the first picture, he was playing with toys, his small hands gripping action figures, looking like any normal child. But the next photo made my stomach twist. He was in what looked like a dimly lit basement, watching Mickey Mouse on an old, vintage television. It was an image I can never forget. The innocence of the scene was unbearable, and yet, there was something so horribly wrong about it. I could almost hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears as reality started to sink in. This wasn't some sick joke. This wasn't a setup. This was real. My entire body went cold. The adrenaline rush I'd been feeling turned into a wave of pure terror. I was no longer just dealing with some dark curiosity. I was now face to face with something much darker than I had ever imagined. I had crossed a line that I should never have approached. My stomach churned as I realized I had stumbled onto something that wasn't just illegal, it was monstrous. I tried to close the conversation, but before I could even think of walking away, another message popped up on my screen. It was chilling in its simplicity: "Pay me, and I can show you more. Would you like that?" Those words hung in the air, like a deadly invitation I couldn't ignore. My mind raced, torn between terror and morbid curiosity. What kind of place was I in? What had I just uncovered? The idea of paying to see more, to dive deeper into this twisted abyss, was almost too tempting to resist, but at the same time I knew I had to get out of there. There was no coming back from this. No matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just some horrific mistake, the truth was that I had seen things I could never unsee. And that question, lingering on my screen, made me realize just how far the dark web could pull someone in before they even realized they were already too deep to escape. What the hell had I done? Truth be told, the whole thing started to make me very uneasy. I had seen everything in the dark web, but this was beyond that, so I decided to ask the guy if he was the one for sale. At that point, I felt I needed to gather as much information as possible to take to the authorities. The guy replied that yes, he was one of those, which made me more nervous. I asked for proof, and the guy sent me a picture of a boy who was clearly his son trying to trick me. He then asked me my name, which I tried to avoid for obvious reasons. I didn't want him to know who I really was, so in the end I told him my name was Maximus. It wasn't my real name, obviously. But on the dark web you don't share those details. After I told him that, I didn't hear back for almost an hour, which made me think that he was probably an undercover agent following me. But finally I heard back from the guy. He sent me a message with a video attached. In the clip, there was a little boy playing with some Toy Stories dolls, and in the background I could hear the voice of a man who I assumed was the salesman asking the boy what his name was. The little boy answered Alan. He was then asked who was filming him, and the little boy said it was his uncle. Then they asked him who the video was for, and he replied, "For Uncle Maximus." That left me both dumbfounded and horrified. I broke out in a cold sweat and felt nauseous. The situation grew even more disturbing when the man asked the boy why they were filming, and the boy laughed, replying it was to find a new mom and dad. Their conversation made it clear this wasn't a joke. By the end of the video, the man confirmed that Alan was indeed real and in need of a loving home. He casually discussed payment, preferring Bitcoin but accepting other cryptocurrencies. Alarmed, I quickly saved the video, sent the details to myself, and anonymously reported everything to the authorities. I never learned what happened next, but I assumed the FBI intervened. Thankfully, I wasn't targeted or harmed. The dark web is a chilling place where anything, no matter how horrifying, can be bought. It's disturbingly real, far beyond most people's imagination.